love can be the deadliest weapon, and in the smoke-filled alleys of the 1930s, Mary Kinder learned that too late. When passion met power, blood was the only promise left standing. Before we descend into this dark love story, hit subscribe and turn on notifications, because what you're about to hear isn't just crime history. It's heartbreak carved in bullets and betrayal. The wind carried dust and gossip through the narrow streets of Huntington, Indiana, the kind of small town where dreams died before sundown. It was the 1910s, a time of rough hands, empty pockets, and silent desperation. And somewhere among the faded clapboard houses and flickering gas lamps, a girl named Mary Kinder learned that the world didn't hand out mercy for free. She wasn't born bad. No one ever is. Mary grew up in a house that smelled like coal smoke and fried potatoes, the youngest of a restless brood who never stayed in one place long enough to grow roots. Her father worked odd jobs when the bottle didn't take him first, and her mother, God bless her, tried to keep the family stitched together with prayer and borrowed sugar. But in that house, love was just another thing that came and went. Mary spent most of her early years watching the trains roll by, each whistle screaming of places she'd never see. To the rest of Huntington, she was the quiet girl with sad eyes, the one who always looked like she was listening to something no one else could hear. But under that quiet, a storm was brewing. She wanted more than what the town could offer, more than hand-me-down dreams and hand-to-mouth living. She wanted to matter. The trouble began the same way it always does, with charm. Mary was barely 17 when she started hanging around a local pool hall, where the air smelled like tobacco and cheap ambition. That's where she met men who wore trouble like a second skin, slick talkers, gamblers, and petty crooks with shiny shoes and promises as fake as the coins in their pockets. They made her laugh. They made her feel seen, and for a girl like Mary, that was enough to keep coming back. It didn't take long before she learned how to survive in their world, how to smile without giving herself away, how to read lies like headlines, how to steal a man's heart just long enough to keep his wallet. She wasn't a saint, but she wasn't evil either. Just a girl trying to crawl her way out of nothing, but every rise starts with a mistake, and Mary's mistake was falling for the wrong man first. His name was Dale Kinder, a small-time crook with a big mouth and bigger dreams. They married young, thinking love could outrun the law. For a while it almost did. They drifted between states, living off stolen checks and false smiles. But Dale was reckless, the kind of man who thought he was smarter than everyone else. One night the police came knocking, and just like that, her short-lived marriage ended in sirens and smoke. Mary was left standing in the street, wearing a cheap dress and a face full of disbelief. Dale went to prison, and Mary went looking for something to fill the hollow he left behind. That's when the darkness found her. In the underbelly of the Midwest, Prohibition had turned ordinary men into outlaws. Speakeasies glowed like secret fires under the city, where liquor flowed and gunfire sang backup to jazz. Mary drifted into that world like a moth drawn to a dangerous flame. She started running errands, carrying coded messages, and charming police officers into looking the other way. She wasn't the boss, not yet, but she was learning fast. Her beauty was her passport. Her silence, her armor. In a world full of men who wanted control, she learned how to let them think they had it. There was a confidence in her walk, a sharpness in her gaze that made people both want and fear her. By the time she turned 25, Mary Kinder wasn't just surviving, she was moving. Still somewhere inside, a part of her longed for something real, a connection that wasn't built on lies, a love that wouldn't crumble under the weight of gunpowder. She found pieces of that in fleeting faces, but none of them lasted. Until one night, in a smoke-filled bar on the edge of Indianapolis, she looked across the room and saw him, Harry Pierpont. He didn't look like trouble at first. He was trouble. Just wore it better than most. Tall, lean, and calm in a way that made other men nervous. His eyes had that quiet kind of fire, the kind that didn't shout but promised. He was the kind of man who made danger look romantic. And to Mary, romance had always been another name for risk. Their first conversation was short, but it left an echo. He wasn't like the others. No boast, no small talk. Just a steady voice asking questions that made her forget to lie. When he smiled, it wasn't kind, but it was real. And when he left, she felt something she hadn't felt in years, fear. the kind that comes when you realize you might actually care. That night, she couldn't sleep. She told herself it was nothing, just another crook with good eyes and bad timing. But deep down she knew the truth. Something dangerous had begun. And Mary Kinder, the girl from nowhere, was standing at the edge of everything she'd ever wanted and everything that could destroy her. As the days passed, fate kept pulling their paths together. The underworld had its own kind of gravity, and the same people who whispered Harry's name in fear began to whisper hers beside it. Together, they became the kind of rumor that moved faster than bullets. Two souls circling each other in a dance that could only end one way, and yet, in those early days, it almost looked like love. Harry would send word for her through backroom messengers, and she'd show up in silk and confidence, lighting cigarettes with a trembling hand she didn't let him see. He told her stories about the jobs he'd pulled, the banks he'd robbed, the way his crew moved like ghosts through small-town vaults. She listened, half in awe, half in denial. He wasn't just a thief, he was an idea. Freedom, rebellion, danger. Everything she'd been searching for since she was that lonely girl watching trains pass by. But every dream has a cost. And Mary, for all her sharp edges, was still a dreamer. The first time she helped Harry, it was small. A lookout job outside a safe house in Kokomo. The second time, she carried a gun in her purse. The third time, she realized there was no turning back. By then, her name was already on file in half the police stations across Indiana. But in those moments, sitting beside him in stolen cars, watching the moon blur through the windshield, Mary didn't care. For the first time in her life, she wasn't running from something. She was running with someone, and that made all the difference. In the darkness of that world, where loyalty was a currency and betrayal was inevitable, Mary Kinder had found her place. Not as a victim, not as a sidekick, but as the woman behind the man who would soon be known as one of America's most feared outlaws. But little did she know, love in the criminal underworld wasn't written in ink. It was carved in blood. There's a fine line between fascination and destruction, and for Mary Kinder, that line was drawn in Harry Pierpont's smile. By the time she met him again, months after their first encounter in that smoke-drenched Indianapolis bar, Harry had already carved a name for himself in the papers. Bank bandit strikes again, the headlines read. Pierpont gang eludes police in bold getaway. To most, he was a ghost in a fedora. To Mary, he was something else entirely, a force that made the world spin faster. He wasn't the kind of man who talked much. When he did, his words carried weight, the way a loaded gun does when it sits quietly on a table. He moved through rooms like he owned the air. Even the roughest men stood a little straighter when he entered, not because of fear, but respect. There was something about Harry that made you believe he'd already seen the end of the story, and somehow, he'd won. Mary tried to stay away. She really did. But trouble has a way of finding those who once loved its touch, and Harry was the kind of trouble you didn't forget. He sent for her one evening. A note slipped under her boarding house door. Just her name and a time. No signature. No address. She knew better than to go. But curiosity has a heartbeat all its own. When she arrived, the air was thick with cigarette smoke and jazz from a broken radio. Harry sat behind a table littered with blueprints, bank schedules, and whiskey glasses half drained of courage. His eyes lifted slowly, a faint smile tugging at his lips. Didn't think you'd come, he said. I didn't either, she replied. That was the night everything changed. He poured her a drink, talked to her about life, about the way money ruled everything and the law served whoever could pay it best. To Mary, it didn't sound like justification. It sounded like truth. For the first time, someone spoke the language she had always understood but never dared to say out loud. Harry wasn't like Dale. He wasn't desperate or sloppy. He planned every move like a man building his own legend, piece by piece. And to her surprise, he wanted her to be part of it. You've got something the others don't, he told her, tapping a cigarette against the table. You know when to keep quiet. You think. You don't scare easy. I need someone like that. It wasn't romance, not yet. It was recruitment, but Mary didn't care. The way he looked at her, not as a distraction, not as a plaything, but as an equal in a world ruled by men. That was its own kind of seduction. She joined his crew in the only way she knew how, quietly, carefully, and all in. She became the lookout, the decoy, the woman who could talk her way out of anything. The one who could flash a smile at a nervous bank clerk while Harry and his boys emptied the safe. And it worked. For a while, they were unstoppable. The Pierpont gang became the Midwest's most feared crew. They robbed banks across Indiana, Ohio, and Kentucky, slipping through police nets like shadows. Each heist was planned with surgical precision. They'd roll up in stolen cars, cut the phone lines, and be gone before the law even knew what happened. The papers called them gentlemen bandits. Mary wasn't just the girlfriend. She was the silent engine that kept it all running. She handled the logistics, found safe houses, and even smuggled notes to men locked up in county jails. Every time she saw Harry, her heart twisted between fear and devotion. Their bond deepened in motel rooms and moonlit hideouts. She'd sit by the window, cigarette in hand, listening to the faint wail of sirens far away. Harry would be cleaning his gun, his expression calm, unreadable. "Doesn't it ever scare you?" she asked him once. He looked up. "Only dying for nothing." That line stayed with her. Maybe that's why she kept following him, even when every instinct told her to run. She wanted her life to mean something, even if it ended in the dirt. As the gang grew bolder, the law grew hungrier. And yet, for Mary, danger had become a kind of drug, invisible, intoxicating. She started dressing sharper, carrying herself with the poise of someone who had seen too much and felt too little. When she walked into a room, people noticed, not because she was loud, but because she looked like she knew secrets they'd never hear. But love, real love, has a way of cracking even the hardest shells. Harry could be cold, ruthless, even cruel. But with her there were moments, rare, fleeting, when the mask slipped. Nights when he'd pull her close and whisper stories about his childhood, about a mother who prayed too hard and a father who didn't stay long enough. About the first time he saw someone die and how quiet it really was. In those moments, she saw the boy beneath the outlaw, and that's what broke her the most. Not his crimes, but his humanity. Still, the violence followed them like a shadow. They lived on the run, changing cars, names, and towns every few days. Every knock at the door felt like Judgment Day. Every siren, a countdown. Mary learned to sleep with one eye open and her heart half closed. The thrill that once excited her now felt like a warning. But by then it was too late to turn back. The world had already decided who she was, Mary Kinder, Moll of the Pierpont gang. One night, after a near-miss job in Dayton, she and Harry drove for hours through the rain, silent except for the steady hum of tires on wet asphalt. When they finally stopped, she turned to him and said, "You ever think about stopping? Just walking away?" He didn't answer right away. Then he said quietly, "If I stop, they win. And I've been running too long to let them win now." She looked at him then, really looked, and saw the truth. There would be no happy ending. Whatever this was between them, it would end the same way every outlaw story did, with blood and a headline. But love doesn't listen to reason. When Harry kissed her that night, it felt like surrender, not to him, but to fate itself. In his arms, she found both her salvation and her undoing. The world outside might have been falling apart, but in that brief stolen silence, they were just two lost souls trying to love each other before the bullets came. As dawn broke, painting the sky with muted gold, Mary stared out the car window and whispered to herself, "I chose this." And she was right. From that day forward, she wasn't just following Harry Pierpont. She was becoming part of his legend, a woman bound to a killer not by fear or greed, but by something darker, devotion, the kind of devotion that ends in blood. By the early 1930s, the name Pierpont carried weight, the kind that made men lower their voices and bar owners reach for hidden bottles. Harry Pierpont had become more than a criminal. He was a symbol of rebellion in a country still bleeding from the Great Depression. Newspapers painted him as a dark folk hero, a man who stole from banks that had stolen from the people. And by his side, always silent but ever present, was Mary Kinder, the woman they called the Queen of the Gang. The title wasn't hers by demand. It was something that clung to her, earned not through violence, but through nerve, loyalty, and an unspoken understanding of how to survive in a man's world without becoming their victim. She didn't pull the trigger, but she planned routes, handled cash, and calmed nerves when the world was seconds from collapse. Every successful heist carried her fingerprint, invisible, precise, and irreplaceable. When people described Mary, they said she had eyes like winter rain, clear, cold, and impossible to look away from. She could sit in a crowded speakeasy and make a man confess his sins without saying a word. But the only man she ever truly listened to was Harry. To her, he was still the same quiet storm she'd met years before. To him, she was the one person who didn't flinch when the masks fell. Their empire grew fast. The Pierpont gang's reach stretched across states: Indiana, Illinois, Michigan, Ohio. They had safe houses in the woods, hideouts in small towns, and connections deep in the underworld. Police departments scrambled to catch them, but Harry was always one step ahead. He studied maps like a general, predicted manhunts before they began, and vanished before dawn broke. Mary was the one who made those vanishing acts possible. She was the one who secured disguises, gathered supplies, and sweet-talked suspicious landlords into believing they were just another couple on the move. The crew trusted her, not because she was Harry's girl, but because she never panicked. When gunfire erupted, she moved like clockwork, calm, steady, cold. But behind that calm, something dangerous was stirring. The more they took, the more the world seemed to demand of them. Bigger banks, bolder escapes, higher stakes, and in that chase for infamy, the line between power and paranoia began to blur. Harry's eyes, once sharp and calculating, started to carry the weight of every man he'd outsmarted and every cop who'd sworn to bring him down. Nights grew longer, tempers shorter. There were whispers of betrayal, not from Mary, but from within the crew itself. Money went missing. Plans leaked. Every job became a gamble, not just with the law, but with loyalty. Mary felt it. She could read tension like others read smoke. One night, while they were holed up in a rundown farmhouse outside Dayton, she found Harry sitting alone at the table, a bottle half empty beside him. The radio hissed softly in the background. A news report about another bank job tied to their name. "Someone's talking," she said quietly. Harry didn't look up. "I know. Who?" He finally met her eyes. "Doesn't matter. They'll be gone before morning." That was Harry's world. Simple, brutal, efficient. And Mary accepted it, even as the weight of it pressed against her conscience. She'd seen enough blood to know there was no clean way out. Still, she couldn't help but wonder what it would be like to live a normal life again. A house with curtains, mornings without fear, love without shadows. But dreams like that had no place in the gangster's gospel. The gang's biggest job came in 1933. Rumor had it they were planning something so audacious that even seasoned criminals called it suicide. A direct strike at a major city bank, armed to the teeth and carried out in broad daylight. Harry wanted it to be their masterpiece. The job that would write their names in history before they disappeared for good. Mary tried to talk him out of it. "Every man you've crossed is waiting for you to slip," she warned. "Don't hand them the chance." Harry smiled that familiar, quiet smile. "You can't win if you don't take the risk," and that was the end of it. The morning of the heist was cold and gray, the kind of day that promised bad luck. Mary watched from a distance, her hands trembling despite herself. She wasn't in the bank. Harry wouldn't allow it, but she was close enough to hear the echo of gunfire that followed. The job went sideways. One of the crew panicked. A guard fought back. Sirens erupted across the city like a warning from the heavens. When Harry finally returned to the safe house, his coat was soaked in blood. Not his, but close enough. 3 men were dead. Another was missing. The money they'd risked everything for was less than half what they expected. Mary said nothing. She just poured him a drink and sat beside him as the weight of it all settled in. For the first time, she saw something crack in him. Not fear, he didn't believe in that, but exhaustion, the kind that lives deep in a man's bones. "Maybe this is it," he murmured. "Maybe we've pushed it too far." She wanted to say yes. To tell him they could run, vanish, start again somewhere no one knew their names. But before the words could form, he looked up, and she saw the fire in his eyes again. "No," he said. "We're not done yet." And just like that, the moment for escape vanished. The next weeks blurred into chaos. Police raids, false identities, a constant dance of survival. Harry was wounded in a skirmish near Chicago, a bullet grazing his shoulder. Mary tended to him in silence, her hands steady even as fear gnawed at her. "You're going to get yourself killed," she whispered. He smirked weakly. "Not before I make history." But history, as Mary would later realize, is written in the blood of those who chase it. Their love, once a flame that defied the world, began to flicker under the pressure. The man she'd fallen for, calm, commanding, untouchable, was slipping into obsession. He talked less, trusted no one, slept with a gun in his hand, and Mary, the queen of the gang, became his last anchor to sanity. She cooked when they had food, patched wounds with trembling hands, and sat awake through endless nights, listening to every sound outside, waiting for the knock that would end it all. By then, her reflection in the mirror was barely recognizable. The soft edges of youth had hardened. Her eyes told stories no one wanted to hear. She wasn't the girl from nowhere anymore. She was a woman who had seen what love looks like when it's tangled in crime and consequence. The papers called her beautiful. The law called her dangerous. Harry called her his salvation, but deep down, Mary knew the truth. She wasn't saving him. She was following him straight into the dark, and she didn't know how to stop. The empire they'd built was starting to rot from the inside. Allies turned to informants, hideouts burned, and money slipped through desperate fingers. The queen and her king were running out of places to hide, and the world was closing in. The winter of 1934 came like a final warning. Sharp winds cutting through empty streets, the sky a dull sheet of gray that never seemed to lift. By then, the Pierpont gang was no longer feared. They were hunted. What had once been a tight operation of loyalty and precision had unraveled into a desperate struggle for survival. The headlines that once glamorized their heists now printed their faces under bold black letters. Wanted, dead or alive. For Mary Kinder, the chase had stopped feeling romantic a long time ago. The thrill that once set her heart racing had turned into a cold ache that never left her chest. Every safe house felt temporary. Every sunrise carried the same question. How much longer can this last? The answer came sooner than she wanted. Harry was growing reckless. The sharp mind that once predicted every move was clouded by fatigue and paranoia. He trusted fewer people, and even those few he trusted watched him with wary eyes. Sleep came in fragments. Meals went untouched. Every noise, a car outside, a door creaking, made his hand twitch toward the pistol under his coat. Mary saw it all and said nothing. She knew better than to challenge him. Instead, she stayed close, cleaning wounds, burning letters, keeping their world stitched together with silence and trembling devotion. But inside, she could feel the distance widening between them. The man who once made her feel invincible now looked like a ghost, worn thin by the weight of his own legend. Their last plan was born out of desperation, one final heist to buy their way out. Not another grand bank robbery, but something smaller, simpler, an armory hit. Enough weapons, enough cash, enough time to vanish for good. They mapped it out in a rented room on the outskirts of Toledo. The wallpaper peeled from the corners, and the air smelled like mold and gun oil. Harry sat at the table, cigarette smoke curling around his face like a halo of ruin. "After this," he said, "we're gone. You and me. No more banks. No more blood." Mary wanted to believe him. She wanted to imagine a world where they could disappear, where she could wake up without fear and live a life that wasn't built on lies. But in her heart, she knew better. Men like Harry didn't walk away. They burned out. Still, she nodded. "After this," she whispered. The night of the job was silent, windless. They moved under the cover of darkness, headlights off, engines humming low. Mary stayed behind the wheel, parked on a back road with the motor running. The plan was simple. In and out in 15 minutes. But plans don't save you when fate's already made its decision. She heard the first gunshot before the clock struck 10. Then another. Then a scream, short, sharp, and human. Her hands tightened on the steering wheel, eyes locked on the warehouse door as flashes of light burst from inside. A shadow stumbled out, clutching his shoulder, followed by the echo of sirens. Mary's heart stopped. Moments later, Harry appeared, limping, dragging a duffel bag that leaked money and blood in equal measure. She threw the door open, and he collapsed into the seat beside her. The tires screamed as she hit the gas, leaving chaos in the rearview mirror. They didn't speak for miles. Harry's breathing was ragged, the front of his shirt soaked crimson. She ripped off her scarf, pressing it against his wound, her voice trembling. "Hold on, Harry, we're almost clear." He gave a faint smile. the same one that had always undone her. "You drive like hell, Mary. Someone's got to keep you alive," she muttered, but deep down, she knew no one could keep him alive forever. They ditched the car outside a small town and stumbled into the woods. The snow was knee-deep, their footprints trailing behind like a confession. They found an abandoned barn and took shelter, huddled beside a lantern that threw more shadow than light. Harry was fading fast. His hand clutched hers with surprising strength. "If I don't make it, don't," she interrupted. "You'll make it," he shook his head slowly. "You've got to run if it comes to that." "Promise me." Mary didn't answer. She just kept holding the cloth to his wound, as if pressure alone could stop fate. Outside, the wind howled through the cracks of the old wood. Every sound felt closer than the last. The crunch of boots in snow, the faint murmur of voices. The law had found them. When the floodlights hit, she barely had time to react. Shouts erupted. The barn door burst open in a storm of light and splinters. Mary ducked behind a crate, covering her ears as gunfire tore through the walls. Harry returned fire until the revolver clicked empty. Then silence, heavy, absolute. When she looked over, he was slumped against the post, his head tilted just slightly, eyes half open and still. The blood on his chest gleamed black in the lantern light. For a moment, the world froze. Mary didn't scream. She didn't cry. She just stared, the sound of her heartbeat louder than the officers closing in. When they dragged her out, she didn't resist. Her hands, once steady and sharp, hung limp at her sides. The papers called it the fall of the Pierpont gang. To them, it was justice served, another outlaw story ending in gunfire and glory. But to Mary, it was nothing like that. It wasn't glory. It was grief. They charged her with harboring fugitives, aiding robberies, and a dozen other crimes she no longer cared to hear. She sat in the courtroom as witnesses spoke her name like it was poison, her face unreadable, her mind somewhere far away, back in that barn, with Harry's last words echoing like ghosts. When the verdict came, 5 years in prison, she barely blinked. Behind bars, time lost its meaning. The days bled together, slow and gray. The other inmates whispered about her. The gangster's girl, the one who loved a killer. She didn't correct them. In a way, they were right. Love had been her crime, and she had served her sentence long before the judge ever spoke. Sometimes, in the quiet hours of the night, she would close her eyes and see him. Not the outlaw, not the headline, but the man who had once looked at her like she was the only thing real in a world built on lies. And every time she woke, she whispered the same words under her breath. I kept my promise, because she never ran. Not when the guns fired, not when the law came, not even when the man she loved bled out beside her. She stayed, and that was her tragedy. When Mary Kinder was finally released, the world had moved on. The depression had eased. The legends of the gangsters had become dime novels and whispered myths. She walked out of the prison gates into a world that no longer cared who she was. No reporters. No flowers. Just cold wind and silence. She disappeared into obscurity, living the rest of her days under false names, working odd jobs, keeping to herself. To the few who met her, she was just an older woman with faraway eyes, polite, quiet, and always staring at something no one else could see. But in her mind, she was still in that car with Harry, the road stretching out before them, endless and free, and maybe in some cruel way, that was freedom, not escape, but remembrance. The knowledge that she had loved someone so completely that it burned away every other part of her. The cell was small, cold, and silent, except for the rhythmic drip of water somewhere behind the stone wall. Mary Kinder sat on the edge of her cot, fingers tracing the cracks between bricks as if they might spell out her future. Her reflection stared back from a dented tin mirror, pale, hollow-eyed, but still carrying the faint trace of the woman she used to be. The woman who once danced to jazz under neon lights. The woman who believed love could save anyone, even a killer. When they told her Harry Pierpont was gone, she didn't cry. She just stood there staring at the prison warden's mouth as he delivered the news in a flat, official tone. Executed this morning. The words felt like a blade pressed gently against her throat, not sharp enough to kill her, but deep enough to leave a scar she'd wear forever. In that moment, she realized the world had moved on without them. The gang was gone, the money long spent, and the headlines that once called her the Blonde Gun Moll had been replaced by newer crimes, newer criminals. The public had already forgotten the woman who rode shotgun with a murderer, but Mary never forgot. Each night, she'd replay their memories like film reels burned at the edges, the motel hideouts, the road chases, the laughter in the dark after close calls. She remembered the smell of gasoline on Harry's jacket, the sound of his lighter snapping open before a job, the way he'd grin like the world couldn't touch him. She hated him for that smile, hated him because part of her still loved him through it all. When she closed her eyes, she could still hear his voice. "Don't worry, doll. They'll never catch me." But they did. And they took him from her in the most brutal way a world like theirs could, publicly. Efficiently, without a shred of mercy, Mary was left behind, drifting through time like a ghost that didn't know it was dead. Years later, after her release, she returned to Indiana. The old neighborhoods were gone. The bars where they used to drink were torn down, the roads renamed. No one remembered the name Kinder. No one remembered Pierpont. The past had been erased, buried under modern streets and fresh concrete. She found work under a false name, quiet work, folding linens in a small-town hotel. No one suspected she was once the most wanted woman in the Midwest. She was just another tired face in a world that had forgotten the roar of Tommy guns and the glamour of the roaring 20s. But sometimes, in the soft hum of evening, when the sun dipped low and the light spilled across the windows, she'd catch her reflection again, and for a heartbeat she'd see him behind her. Harry, young, dangerous, smirking like he always did. She'd whisper into the empty room, "You ruined me, Harry, and I let you." Love had been her crime. Not robbery, not conspiracy, not murder, though the courts had tried to say otherwise. Her real sin was believing she could fix a broken man by loving him hard enough. She thought her loyalty made her untouchable. But loyalty in their world was just another currency, one that always ran out. Mary wasn't innocent. She'd driven the getaway cars. She'd held the guns. She'd lied to the cops with a smile. But deep down, every crime she committed was an act of devotion. Every bullet fired was just another heartbeat in her doomed romance. And maybe that's what made her story so tragic. Not that she loved a killer, but that she couldn't stop loving him even after he was gone. One winter night, as snow fell outside her small apartment, Mary opened a worn box she'd kept hidden beneath her bed. Inside were the relics of another life, a silver cigarette case, a faded photograph of her and Harry at a roadside diner, and a single bullet, tarnished but still heavy. She held it up to the light. "This is all that's left of us," she whispered. Then she smiled. That faint, knowing smile of someone who had finally made peace with her ghosts. She wasn't the glamorous outlaw anymore, or the frightened lover on the run. She was just Mary now, older, wiser, alone, but not broken, because somewhere deep inside her, beneath all the pain and regret, she carried a truth that only those who'd lived her kind of life could understand, that love and crime were born from the same place. Desperation, hunger, and the need to feel alive in a world that kept trying to kill your soul. In her final years, Mary Kinder faded quietly into history. She died without wealth, without fame, and without redemption in the public eye. But in the dark corners of gangster folklore, her name still surfaces, whispered in stories about loyalty, betrayal, and the price of loving too deeply. Some called her a victim, others called her complicit. But the truth was far more complicated. She was both, the lover and the accomplice, the dreamer and the destroyer. And perhaps in her own way, she found freedom not in escape, but in remembrance. Because the world may forget names, but it never forgets stories, especially the ones written in blood and betrayal. The final image of Mary Kinder isn't of a glamorous outlaw or a woman in chains. It's of an old woman sitting by a window, smoke curling from a half-burned cigarette, as she watches the streetlights flicker below. Her eyes are distant, lost somewhere between past and present. Outside, the snow keeps falling, soft, endless, and pure. Inside, the woman who once rode with killers finally closes her eyes. Maybe she dreams of Harry one last time, the man who taught her that love could be as fatal as a gunshot. Or maybe, just maybe, she dreams of peace. End reflection. Mary Kinder's story isn't about the crime she committed. It's about the cost of loving someone too dangerous to love. It's about how loyalty can destroy you, and how even the fiercest hearts can break quietly, without witnesses. Her name may be lost to history, but her story lingers, a haunting reminder that not all gangsters carry guns. Some carry love as their weapon of choice.